This guy was a Russian prisoner in there for robbery. Now, that's bad, right? Obviously, but it's not also the worst crimes that people who have served with Wagner have been accused of. There have been murderers and rapists who have been given guns and sent to go fight in Ukraine. So I wanted to talk about this story because this story is wild. These are very, very rare interviews, the interview we're about to watch. So I was only ever given one chance to interview a Russian soldier, and I didn't go through with it due to security risks. I don't do interviews with POWs because that feels weird, but it was not a POW. It was somebody outside of that, and I can't give too many details, but I didn't end up going through with it because of security risks, even though I knew it would have been a big story, because you got to be responsible and you got to choose that responsibility, choose safety over just going for the big story at no risk, completely disregarding your own safety and the safety of the people you're interviewing and the safety of those who are working with you. You can't do that. So it's very rare that we get to have these interviews because the Russians obviously don't want their soldiers being interviewed by the Western press because they could easily make them look bad if they start mouthing off about what they've really seen. And so this is a very rare interview that CNN was able to get in an exclusive interview. It's a 360 exclusive with a Wagner Group defector. So this isn't just any Russian soldier. This is a Wagner Group defector. For those of you who don't know what the Wagner Group is, even though I know a lot of my audience will definitely know, the Wagner Group is a private military company founded by a neo-Nazi, even if the group isn't like a neo-Nazi ideological group. It was founded by a neo-Nazi and has a far-right contingent. And the Wagner Group has fought in Central Africa. They have fought in Syria. They've committed war crimes in a lot of these countries, like torturing people with sledgehammers. And in the country that they're currently fighting the most in, Ukraine, which has allowed them to really swell their numbers with prisoners from prisons that they're offering parole to join, and just general military contracts. They've swelled their numbers, and the brutality has continued with them. They haven't changed. As in, for example, one of the Wagner Group soldiers who surrendered to the Ukrainians, once Wagner got their whole hands on him again, they executed him on camera, openly and freely, with a sledgehammer, bashed in his skull, uploaded the video online, then sent a sledgehammer to an EU representative to send a message. So that's the group we're talking about. And so this guy is a soldier from that military organization, headed by Prigozhin, who is also trying to raise his influence in comparison to people like Russian Defense Minister Shoigu and others when it comes to the amount of influence they have in this war. So let's watch this interview because this is a really unique opportunity CNN has here.
60 exclusive with a former fighter for the Wagner Group who has defected. As you know, Wagner Group is a mercenary force run by Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian oligarch close to Vladimir Putin. The U.S. has labeled Wagner a transnational criminal organization, which has been heavily involved in the war in Ukraine and has been heavily recruiting from Russian prisons. Wagner has taken credit for recent gains in the areas around Bakhmut. There's been a lot of reports of fatalities among Wagner's poorly trained and equipped convicts, and reports that those who refuse to fight or attempt to escape are executed as a warning to others. One Wagner fighter who defected to Ukrainian forces and then was sent back to Russia as part of a prisoner exchange was then executed on camera with a sledgehammer. Now a man named Andrei Medvedev, claiming to have defected from the Wagner Group, has crossed into Norway and has just been released after being interviewed by Norwegian officials. He's hoping to receive asylum there. Andrei, an orphan, spent 4 years in prison in Russia for robbery before joining the Wagner Group, and we should note his service in Wagner was confirmed by its leader, Prigozhin. I spoke to Andrei Medvedev before airtime. If you could just talk a little bit about what it was like
Be clear, this guy was a Russian prisoner in there for robbery. Now, that's bad, right? Obviously, but it's not also the worst crimes that people who have served with Wagner have been accused of. There have been murderers and rapists who have been given guns and sent to go fight in Ukraine. And I gotta say, rapists are not the number one type of people you should be giving machine guns to die in foreign wars. And if you are doing that, that usually does not indicate that you're in a stable, strong situation. I mean, it's probably indicating that you're in a desperate situation when it comes to your requirements for manpower. And Russia's choosing the quantity over quality, or the idea that, well, quantity has a quality of its own in a way. And this guy was a robber who got the opportunity to get out of Russian prison, took it because Russian prisons are horrendous, and then first opportunity he could, went over to Norway, fled out of there. Like a smart person, by the way. Got to give this guy credit for that intelligence.
In the battle on
He doesn't want to take part in Operation Human Shield, Larry.
battlefield with the prisoners, how were they used? What were the tactics? What was it like?
Ну, скажу так, у нас определенной тактики не было.
We weren't receiving any tactical plans. We just got a command to capture the position of the enemy and by ourselves had to come up with a step-by-step plan of how to fulfill it. It was our problem to ensure that a command is fulfilled.
You have said in the past that you saw Wagner troops getting executed for disobeying orders. Is that accurate?
Ну, такие случаи, они сплошь...
Such cases happen very often there. There is a question of how to persuade new recruits who arrived at the front lines and saw what is going on there and decided they don't want to fight to still go ahead and fight. They would round up those who did not want to fight and shoot them in front of the newcomers to develop their self-preservation instinct.
What?
Jesus Christ. Really? My goodness. You know, the thing is, obviously, there isn't any video of this or photos of this, but we do know that the Wagner Group has executed people and that they're perfectly happy with being known as an organization that executes people because they videotaped their executions, uploaded it online, and have bragged about it ever since. So the idea that the Wagner Group could be executing those who don't want to fight in front of other people to basically say, that will be you if you do not go fight, isn't completely out of this world or impossible. And it's probably given credibility by the fact that, again, this person was a fighter within the Wagner Group. And Wagner doesn't even deny this.
Why did you decide to leave the Wagner Group?
Ну, я как уже
I
говорил,
planned to leave Wagner for a while, but I didn't have the opportunity. I was afraid I will be captured and shot as a traitor. I am ready for serious action, but I also want to live. By the end, I knew they won't let me go. I will return as part of the dead or the wounded. It was time to make a radical decision. If it wasn't for my guys, my comrades, I would have been buried at some training ground.
There have been allegations and reports of the execution of civilians, civilians being shot, just walking down the street, of abuse of civilians. Did you see any of that? Did you witness any of that?
Нет, я не могу сказать то, что я...
I cannot say I witnessed this because I was tasked mainly with forested areas and approaches to Bakhmut. I am not aware of such cases. No matter what, we had a strict code of conduct for fighters. If those rules are breached, there will be punishment.
Now, if you listen to how he talks about the Wagner Group, you could hear he called his fellow soldiers comrades, and that he was willing to fight but not willing to be slaughtered. So this doesn't sound like some like anti-war activist or something. This is a guy who basically made the calculation that, look, I don't want to die, so I'm outie. I like you guys. I might be willing to fight under other conditions, but this is a death trap, so I'm outie. And so taking that into consideration, it feels like he has it wasn't like, oh, his deep convictions about all the war crimes he saw or his opposition to the political aspects of this war. It was self-preservation that sent him over to Norway. And so it's not that surprising that he's not going to like come out and rail endlessly about like, oh, war crimes or stuff like that. And it is also 100% possible that he didn't see the war crimes himself. Everybody has a unique experience in war to some degree. People view war and experience war from a million different perspectives. And his could have just been the assault on Bakhmut, where he didn't meet any civilians or didn't see any of that stuff, even though we do know it has occurred because we have video evidence and audio evidence of it occurring.
You escaped into Norway, and the spot where you crossed over, where you said that you crossed over into Norway, it's very heavily guarded on the Russian border. And some people have raised questions about how you were able to even get to the border because it's so heavily, there's so many checkpoints on the way there. Why cross at that place where it was so heavily guarded?
Ну, я скажу, да.
I will say that the border with Norway, where I crossed, is not as protected as much as the border with Finland. But in this case, I am honestly very grateful for the training I received with the Ministry of Russian Defense, where I did military service, and grateful to Wagner. The training I received there came in useful, and I gladly put it to use.
Did you have help getting
That's pretty
across?
funny.
Because aren't there many checkpoints even to get close to the border?
Да, я в первую
I was helped by workers of human rights groups in Moscow and elsewhere, even just civilians who heard my story. When I was approaching the last post next to the border, I was helped by a man from Murmansk who found a passport of a man who looked similar to me. I am very grateful to him, but cannot disclose his identity for his safety. The passport helped me to get past the control post, and I was able to get closer to the border.
Why have you agreed to talk? Why do you...
Okay, I see somebody in chat saying, I'd give him asylum in a prison. What is that even, what's even the purpose of that? What do you mean you'd give him asylum in a prison? He is actively defecting and giving interviews publicly about how Wagner people are treated like garbage, right? Why, what would we imprison him over? He is still a criminal? Like, you mean he committed a crime in Russia? So we're gonna arrest him in Norway for a crime he committed in Russia, which the Russian government doesn't even want to keep him contained over anymore because they made him join Wagner and gave him a gun. What does that mean? What? That doesn't make sense. I don't understand why we would arrest this man. That it feels more okay. I can understand. Also join Wagner. He was a prisoner, and from what I've heard, you know, the when you talk about like joining Wagner and being able to join Wagner and giving it as like an opportunity, from what I've been told, it's less of a choice and more of a heavy recommendation. Now, obviously, I don't know all of the ins and outs of Wagner recruitment. They're not going to tell me, and they're not going to tell Western press. But from what I've heard from the grapevine, it's a lot less, okay, if you want to join, you can. If you don't worry, you can stay here, you know. It's more, you really want to join the Wagner group. Obviously, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but when we say he joined, I am not 100% in the camp of believing that every single prisoner who was given that offer was not in any way intimidated into accepting the offer. I'm not accepting that. I am not. That's the first thing. The second thing, let's say he did take the opportunity. Look at the Russian prison system. When you know how brutal it is and how bad the conditions are, it's not that surprising that he's like, oh, you can get me out of here into somewhere else? Sure, I'll take the opportunity. Absolutely. Then he takes the opportunity, goes over there, and he's like, I'm outie. I'm not gonna die for nothing. Then he crosses the border into Norway. Does it matter how's their prison looks like? What? So your conclusion is he joined the Wagner group and fled, and we need to arrest him for what? What are we arresting him for? For what? Being coerced, possibly? For, at one point, being in prison? For being a part of the Wagner group? And a felon. He went to prison, he served some time, then he was released for his service in the Wagner group. So we're going to arrest him in a Norwegian prison because he did a robbery in Russia 4 or 5 years ago, which he's already served 4 or 5 years for, and was sent into hell for. So we're gonna, we in Norway we'll give you 10 to 15 years in prison for carjacking that occurred in another country 4 or 5 years ago under a different set of laws and circumstances. What? We arrest him for being a Wagnerite. So your belief is anybody who is a soldier in Wagner, even before it was designated a criminal organization, should be arrested at the end of the war? Like 10, 20 years in prison? Absolutely. Yes. More? Okay, then you guys are just fucking stupid. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I understand the anger you guys have at Russia. I share that anger, but that's a silly requirement. We're going to take all the soldiers of the opposing army and we're going to put them in prison for 20 years. We're going to be having them break rocks and break coal, and we're gonna put them in the fucking mines. Like, get the fuck out of here. This is silly. This is ridiculous. And that doesn't help anything. That doesn't help anything except be like, oh yeah, we're getting those Russians. That doesn't do anything. What's the benefit? What do we get out of that? So this guy, okay, you know what the message will send to the international community if we arrest this guy for 15 to 20 years for a crime that he was already sentenced for, which, by the way, I think is illegal, actually. I think that's illegal, or at least immoral at the very least. But let's say that's the message we send. What does this tell every Wagner guy? Well, I better not defect from Wagner, no matter how much of a death trap this is, because if I defect from Wagner, I'm going to prison. We better fight to the death, because if we surrender, we're going to prison. Oh, did the Russians actually retreat? We're not retreating. We're not leaving the country, because that means we're going back to prison. Fight to the death. And then all you're going to do is pointlessly make it so more Ukrainian soldiers die, more Russian soldiers die, and then you perpetuate this violence because what? We need to get him for carjacking? Don't you think there's a bigger picture here that's more important? That feels silly. It just feels silly. I would rather Wagnerites watch this interview and think, damn, maybe I should get out of here. That's what I want. I don't want them to see, whew, what a dumbass, shouldn't have betrayed us. Guess I'm gonna keep fighting. What's the better solution? Let them walk free? This guy? Yes. If they decide I'm not gonna fight, I'm outie, we should be incentivizing them leaving. Absolutely. We should be incentivizing every Russian man who doesn't want to fight to not fight. We should be doing everything we can to strangle the Russians of any available manpower that they have. Well, that's your opinion? That's the opinion of the vast majority of people. That's probably the opinion of most human rights groups. That's probably the opinion of most NGOs that work with this. That's probably the opinion of most international legal scholars. That's probably the opinion of most analysts. Like you say, that's my opinion. I mean, yeah, that's the opinion of the international community. Like, I don't want to fight. I surrender. 20 years in prison. Like, what? What for? Did he commit a war crime? He deserves prison, nothing. Okay, so this is just revenge porn for you. You're treating this non-seriously. I'm done. I'm done discussing it. This is just about like, oh, yes, like, revenge. This is all that is to you. It's not like, oh, what? If we take this mindset, it means more dead Ukrainians. You do realize that, right? Because all we're going to be telling Wagner is never surrender, fight to the death. That's the message we're going to be sending them. Never surrender, fight to the death. If you surrender, we're going to treat you like shit. That's the message we send. That's terrible. Why would you ever, why would we want to send that message? Anyway, Stoic Squirrel, thank you for the tier 1 and being so for 23 months. Defectors should be protected. Absolutely. Anyway, let's continue.
Order.
Why have you agreed to talk? Why do you, what message are you trying to, do you want people to know about Wagner, about your experience?
Isn't it typical to take prisoners of war? Yes, if you want to take a POW and you can contain them until the war is over, that's one thing, right? I understand that. But by the way, he's trying to get asylum. So this is also a different situation than capturing a POW, right? Than it would normally be. But what was being advocated for isn't, oh, he's a POW till the war's over. It's, we take him and we keep him in prison for the next 20 years because he dared to join Wagner. Which, what type of message does that send? Or lifetime slippers, if you keep saying this shit, you're like, or send him home after the war. If we send him home after the war, he's gonna be killed. He's gonna be shot. Slippers. When your name is Slippers, is the reason your name's Slippers is because your mind's slipping slowly away? It's slipping out of your grasp. Your grasp of reality is slipping through your fingers. Like, what do you, like, oh, that's his problem? Okay, let me just ask you a question. Is your revenge more important than less dead Ukrainians and Russians? Because my priority would be to win the war with the least amount of deaths possible. That's my priority. And I want to make it so every Russian is constantly contemplating, God, should I just surrender? God, should I defect? Oh God, this feels like a death trap. I want to get out of here. And if we tell them 20 years in prison or we will take you and send you to your captors and they will fucking bash your head in with a sledgehammer, they're gonna be like, well, damn, I don't got any choice but to fight to the death. That's my only option. That's a terrible message to send, man. It's gonna end up getting more people killed because you want to play Punisher.
Ну, знаете, я изначально как бы...
My idea was to tell the people what was happening there, and my mates who died there, they died under orders. So my aim is that the people who are guilty of these crimes should be brought to justice.
And when you say the people who are guilty, who do you mean, and what are they guilty of?
Animal rights. Thank you so much for the Prime. First time subber on the channel. I appreciate that. Could have spent your Prime anywhere, but you spent it here. Appreciate it. I mean, it's better than let us flee Norway. When it gets bad, we're gonna be free. Slippers, you're treating this as if, like, the war is about to be won, like, right now. Like, oh, in a few days it's over, and, like, the front lines for the Russians is completely collapsing. That's not what's happening. The Russians are sending hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of men who will go to Ukraine and kill who knows how many people. This isn't a thing like, oh, he's running away with the situation getting bad. Oh, it is. Like, the situation's bad, but the situation isn't collapsing. What you're going to do is basically give the Russians propaganda to recruit more people to then go kill Ukrainians, and you're going to convince the Russian soldier that their war is righteous because the West hates them, and that if they were to even if they were to contemplate surrendering, that it'd be a death trap for them anyway. Like, that's a terrible thing to do. Terrible thing to do. You want to know why the Soviets didn't surrender that much in 1942, 1941, like later time when the war has been going on? The reason why is because they know if they did, odds are they're going to die. Same reason why the Germans fought so hard to the end in Stalingrad and so many other places, because they knew the same thing, that they didn't give the Soviets mercy, Soviets won't give them mercy. There's a reason why the Germans ran to the West when we were advancing, because they wanted to be arrested by American soldiers. They didn't want to be arrested by Soviet soldiers, because the odds of them surviving was much higher when they were with the West. And so if we can encourage more Russian soldiers to surrender, absolutely. That means less dead people. They were murdering my people for ages, but this strategy you're using means your people get murdered more. Like, I understand this type of, like, now it will be their land, their people, their blood. Like, it's Call of Duty World at War, and you're making those, like, ethical decisions. But this is, like, these decisions on how we treat, on how we treat POWs, how we treat people who surrender and want to give up fighting because they're like, this isn't for me, for whatever reason, how we treat them will affect how Russian soldiers act moving forward. How likely they are to surrender and how likely they are to not surrender. We're just going to make the fight harder if we treat them like shit. And I do not want to make it so more Ukrainians have to die so I can be like, I got my revenge. I shot that dude in the fucking head. Yeah, I'm such a man. 30 years, guillotine, hang him. You know? Like, that might make you, and plus, that doesn't, I'm gonna be for real, that doesn't bring back any of the people who've been murdered. Do you think hanging this guy in the town square is gonna bring back any of the people who died in Bucha, any of the people who died at Izium, Irpin, or any of these other locations? No, it isn't. It's not gonna bring back any of those people. It isn't. All it is gonna add to the bodies. That's all it's gonna do. Anyway.
You know, I would like to take this opportunity of stating publicly, maybe other folk have different views about this, but the first culprit is Prigozhin, because he is the top leader.
Prigozhin runs the Wagner Group. He's in charge of it.
Yes, him, absolutely, and the whole coordinating Wagner lot. And everyone knows it's subject to the Russian government's commands, the whole lot of them.
Does that include Vladimir Putin?
Well,
everyone knows that what is happening there is his decision, of course.
And just finally, Andrei, you lost a lot of, as you say, mates in the fighting. What should their mothers know? What should their families know about what happened to them?
Это были великие люди.
They were great people, great because they were real human beings, and I can assure you that many were sober judges of what was happening out there. They were just people, normal folk, and that applied to the other side as well, because I had occasion to see the bravery of the Ukrainian forces too.
Andre, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Вам спасибо.
Again, man, it's very rare that we get interviews like this. It's very rare. I mean, such a sit-down, sober type interview with this individual. Good job by CNN. Decent interview. I mean, I would have asked more questions. I would have made the interview longer. I'd like a sit-down 1 hour interview with somebody like this. That's the way I love it. But obviously, CNN works different. They got tampon advertisers to please. But still, generally, good for the historical record. Happy they got this interview.